Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 322 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's podcast episode is on what are binaural beats. So, I know that it's exam season at the time of recording, like I've just had my first and my last exam. I know that lots of other psychology students, they're starting to have their psychology exams, like a friend who's in a second year of mine, he had his child development exam at the same time as mine because there's so few master students, so they just threw us all together in the massive hall. And during exam time, lots of students are looking for different tips and tricks about how to revise better, how to study for longer, how to boost their brain power. That's one that I've heard, and it always makes me cringe, and a whole bunch of other factors. And binaural beats is something that I hear constantly about, because some people think that they're really useful, and there's some sort of like studying superpower, but other people aren't quite like that. Other people say that binaural beats has no effect on them. So what's the truth? What does the literature say? Are binaural beats actually useful? Or is it this fad that lots of people and lots of different apps and companies have just invented to try and sell products? So by the end of today's podcast episode, you'll understand what are binaural beats, how are they thought to work, what are the advantages, and what is the effectiveness of binaural beats. So it's a really fun podcast episode coming up. So you got that to look forward to in the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest. So the first one is, the closer our family, the harsher our views on punishment. We all know how emotionally close we are with our families can influence our politics, our personalities, and our perspectives on the world. What we consider less often, however, is how much of our ongoing physical closeness to family plays a role in shaping our values and behaviours. Writing in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, Attitudes and Social Cognitions, a team led by Oliver Snugg suggests that ecological relatedness, the relationship between ourselves and the number of relatives living near us, can influence not just our personalities, but even our views on extreme behaviours like punishment or aggression. Okay, so I won't click on the article itself, but I think this is definitely one of the more out there findings, but it's actually quite interesting. Interesting though. So on second thought, I will actually read one paragraph from the write-up. Open quote. Still, the researchers argue that pro-group behaviours make sense for those with particularly strong identification with family and community. Harsher punishments for antisocial behaviours may arise from a desire to protect one's family from harm, for example, as the lead author Oliver Snugg put it. Open quote again. You naturally feel more connected to those around you, as many of them are family of some sort. But this also means that there are more people around you that you need to protect. Close quote. That's actually what I was thinking of when I first read the article. But I do think that it's both interesting and a little concerning. I think it's interesting because the more our family is in a given community, but then that means they're all in one place though, so there are benefits to that. because you can rely on them for social support, babysitting, and just a general support. And you work like go and see them, you work and go and like have dinner, etc. So you can have real social connectedness within a given community. Because of all in one place, then it means there's lots of people that you care about that you need to protect. So whenever there's any sort of like antisocial behaviour or any sort of like crime committed, then you are going to want to be harsher and more punitive because you want to deter that behaviour. Of course, whilst a retributionist and utilitarian theory of a punishment actually isn't effective at reducing crime because only rehabilitation is, as lots of the research points out, it's still useful to know that having a strong number of like family members in a given area is more likely to lead to aggression and punishment behaviour, which does actually make it a bit more concerning though, because if this does lead to in endorsements of like behaviour, like aggression and other extreme behaviours, then what are the downsides? For example, I can think two of the downsides would be that you're more likely to like beat someone up, or you're more likely to show aggression towards someone though, and that's not good by like modern standards, and to be honest, by moral standards too. But I also think that another downside is that these are people will be more likely to endorse punitive policies that, as we know from the research, just don't work. So lots of different effects and lots of different findings. So definitely food for thought. So the second one is discussing racial trauma in therapy remains tricky in the UK. At best, therapy offers a place for people to talk openly about their lives. This includes the impact of social inequalities. Since the advent of Brexit, researchers have noted a stark increase in the amount of racial harassment, with some organisations recording as much as a five-fold increase in incidences. It follows then that racial trauma is only becoming more important for therapists to be equipped to navigate. As Nico Simon and Laura Simmons points out in their latest paper, however, therapists often lack sufficient knowledge, training, and even confidence to handle these topics in such a sensitive situation. We know from previous research that sometimes gaps like this can cause therapists to even avoid such topics, fearing that they'll get it wrong, and in this process, potentially leaving clients unable to fully share and explore their experiences. Writing in psychology and psychotherapy, the University of Surrey team explores these experiences through interviews with clients who attempted to discuss racial trauma in therapy. They drew out three key themes: how highlighting therapy can both perpetuate racial harms and provide meaningful long-term support. Okay, so the first thing to say about this one is obviously this is tragic, and I think that it's disgusting that there's been like a five-fold increase in racial harassment. It's wrong. No one should ever be discriminated against, but that would be living in an idealist world. But that's still a world that we need to strive towards. But when it comes to a therapy, I think that we aren't given enough resources, because I'm actually quite surprised that we haven't had a detailed lecture on it in my clinical psychology masters. Yes, we had social inequalities and we had that perspective. But racial stuff was just a few slides. Like everything else in that lecture was just a few slides. To be honest, what we needed was a more in-depth, or to be honest, an entire lecture on this topic, or at least a good hour on it, just so we can understand it. Because I understand where these therapists are coming from. Like, I would also be very scared about getting it wrong. I would be scared about hurting the client, causing them further distress, perpetuating the racial harms. So, to be honest, I don't blame them at all for just avoiding the topic altogether. Because if you don't think you're qualified to talk about something, then you are just going to avoid it. But as a personally, on my own experiences from rape counselling and everything else that I've spoken to with other counsellors, I would just say that therapy is a learning opportunity. Every single client can teach us something about ourselves, and every therapist can teach the client a bunch of stuff. So I think that to some extent there needs to be a decrease in the worry that therapists feel about getting it wrong, and just see it as a learning experience. I don't think there's any harm saying to the client, talking about racial trauma, just saying that I don't have lived experience to draw on, and I'm not that knowledgeable about this area. Could you please teach me? I think that is very honest. I think that's very open. And it does just show to the client that you're human. You're not this high and mighty psychotherapist who is going to wave a magic wand, and they need to feel inferior against you. Just admitting that you don't know something is actually quite powerful because it humanizes you and it decreases this power difference. Yep, so of course, not every client is going to like that, but I think the vast majority of them are. Like, I've been really touched when a therapist and a counselors have actually been open to learning from me and how I think they could do something better or they could word something. Like, I remember during my first anorexia counselling appointment, my my counsellor said the worst thing ever. She said I chose my rapist, and I had a breakdown about that later that night. So I told her the next week, like, could you please not say that? Because there was no choice in the matter. So I definitely think that there's a lot of improvement that needs to be had about us learning about racial trauma, but we also just need to admit that we can learn from our clients. That's just something to think about. So the last one is, and this one I'm definitely going to do, victim blaming language results in shorter sexual assault sentences. Convictions for rape in the UK remains comparatively low, despite increases. Fewer than 3 in 1 rapes recorded by police between October 2023 and September 2024 actually results in someone being charged in the same year. Whilst the reasons for this are manifold, previous research has identified rape myths, beliefs, and language that typically place blame on victims of sexual assault rather than rapists as one factor affecting conviction. This is also the new focus of a research led by Christine Brun, published in the Scandinavian Journal of Psychology, which looks at whether the use of language supporting rape myths during a trials affects the likelihood of a conviction in the Norwegian legal system. Echoing prior work, it finds that the presence of victim blaming language can lead courts to favour shorter sentences for those convicted of rape. Well, as you can all probably guess, I find that absolutely disgusting. I have been subject to a lot of these rape myths. I have been subject to a lot of these victim blaming myths. And it is awful. It's absolutely awful to experience that and just be blamed for what someone else did to you. So that is just disgusting. I will not go on a full on tangent about how disgusting this is, how hurtful it is, how it just compounds trauma, how it leads to secondary victimization, etc. But what I will say is just what is wrong? Just what is wrong with people? What is so wrong with people that they would just want to blame the victim? Like, I know rape is one of the most horrific things you can do to someone. Believe me, I do. Because I've experienced it, and because I've went through so much because of it, what I find interesting is that when people go, "Oh my god, rape's horrific," I'm like, I know, but it is so common. We need to do something about it. Can we stop being so emotional and stop being so oh my god about it and try and deny it? Can we actually focus on the issue? Can we actually try and support survivors? Can we actually try and target the rapists and actually make sure they suffer and they get punished for what they did to people? Yes, I think that's where we should be focusing. Going back to the articles, I am going off on slight tangents now, but I would just say that we need to really focus on victim blaming language. I think there should actually be a courtroom rule, to be honest, about you can't use victim blaming language in the courtroom because I've been watching way too many American crime dramas over the years, and I know there are certain rules about language, like you can't use inflammatory statements, you can't use inappropriate questions, etc. Of course, I say you're not meant to, but come on, we all know that lawyers still do, and that's where the objection, sustained, and other rules and stuff like come in. So I think those language rules should actually be used against rape cases and in victim blaming languages. So I think there's a lot of interesting points that we could make. I think that we need to stop just debating this. We've got the research, we just need to apply it. So, yeah, and shorter sentences of those convicted of rape is disgusting. Really, really is. Okay then. So, that's enough of this psychology news section. So let's move on to the personal update. So we're moving on to the personal update. So this week I had my first and my last ever university exam, unless I do something in the future, which I might if I get this job that I applied for. Oh, also speaking of which, I didn't get the assistant educational psychologist job, which to be honest I'm actually quite grateful for, mainly because Kent County Council is the last council I want to work for at the moment, because of who controls it. That's all that I'm going to say because this is not a political show. The reason why I'm telling you that quite openly that I didn't get a job is because I want you to realise that it's perfectly normal not to get jobs and actually get applications rejected. It doesn't make you a failure. It doesn't make you a poor psychology candidate. It doesn't mean that you're a poor student and that all the work you've been doing for the past few years is pointless. It really doesn't mean that whatsoever. It just means that you tried, and you could argue that yes, there was someone better. But to be honest, no. I would actually just argue that you tried, you didn't manage to succeed in it. There will be lots of other jobs available, and you just need to keep going. Applying for jobs is really just a numbers game. Though, as long as you keep learning how to improve your job application too along the way. So I just wanted to mention that first of all. Going back to my exam, I was really nervous about this exam to some extent because when I've been doing the neuropsychology of aging exam, well, when I was doing the module, I was dealing with a lot of mental health stuff. I was not able to focus on lectures whatsoever, so I was really struggling. So I really studied, I really revised, I used a lot of active recall, and when I was actually in the exam, I was really happy because I was just able to remember, and I was actually able to remember stuff that I wrote, stuff that I'd revised, and it really did just like flow out of me, which I'm really quite relieved about. So hopefully it's gone really well. So that exam was 20 multiple choice questions, so 2 per topic, and then it was a list of 10 short answer questions where we needed to write 100 to 300 words per answer, and then we needed to answer 5 of them. So I did them very out of order, but it was a lot of fun. And if you're a member of my email list, then I spoke about what questions I answered. I know I did one on age-based stereotype threat. I know I did one on the issues the researcher might encounter. Then I did another one on something on cognitive behavioral therapy for older adults, and I don't remember the other two. But it's a lot of fun. I really did enjoy that exam, and it really did mark the end of a part of my university journey. Then I've been up to lots of other different projects. I've just had a really nice, fun week. So, as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So, you can always email me, connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment at the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet on Twitter at sci-fi whiteley. I always love to hear from all of you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And please send pictures of where you're listening from all over the world. I love to see where all of you are listening from all over the world. So today's episode has been sponsored by Biological Psychology. And this is a great sponsor for today's episode because it's great, really easy to understand books. It helps you to understand what is biological psychology, how do our neurotransmitters, hormones, our brain, and a whole bunch of other biological functions impact our behaviour. So we look at the role of oxytocin, the brain, how our senses work, which is really a key for today's podcast episode. Because if we don't understand how our senses work, how our brain interprets and creates psychological sensations and actually creates psychological experiences, then we don't understand how our binaural beats could possibly work. Then if you want a great, really easy to understand book that helps you to understand how do binaural beats work in even more depth, then please check out Biological Psychology, available from all major ebook retailers, and you can order the paperback and the hardback version from Amazon, local bookstore or local library if you requested. And if you want the AI-generated audiobook narrated by artificial intelligence, then you can now get that from selected audiobook retailers like Spotify, Kobo, Google Play, and Barnes & Noble, and selected library systems too, like Overdrive, Baker & Taylor, and Biblioteca. So whilst buying books helps to support the creation and the editing of the podcast, my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons, and as always, a massive thank you to my patrons. Your support shows that you like the show and you want to continue. So if you want access to tons of great rewards, including over 60 exclusive blog posts, which are when we made into podcast episodes for weeks, months, or even years, then please head on over to patreon.com/the Psychology World Podcast. Or if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, then now you can at buymeacover.com/Conwhiteley. So that's enough of the personal update. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be looking at binaural beats. This is a lot of fun. It's really interesting and it taps into cognitive psychology and biological psychology, something we don't really tend to focus on too much on podcast. So let's dive into it. What are binaural beats? So binaural beats are an auditory illusion because if you play two tones at slightly different frequencies in separate ears at the same time, the human brain perceives the creation of a third tone that is the difference in the frequency between the two tones being played. For example, if you hear a tone at 405 Hz in one ear, then a tone of 415 Hz in the other ear, then you would hear a binaural beat of 10 Hz. In addition, binaural beats are believed to have a wide range of benefits, such as binaural beats can help to lower stress, help with sleep and relaxation, boost our mood, foster creativity, and increase focus, as well as help with pain management. Nonetheless, some of these claims are just that. They're claims without any empirical support. Personally, the entire reason why I'm doing this psychology podcast episode is because last August, my best friend was resitting one of their exams, and they were telling me about their use of binaural beats. They wanted to know the literature behind it, and of course, every single psychology student just happens to know everything about every single aspect of human behavior. I hate it when people think that. Therefore, I told my friends what I knew, and now I want to understand binaural beats at a deeper level. How do binaural beats work? If you've done biological psychology before, then you might be aware that our brainwaves operate at different frequencies, and different brainwaves are associated with different states. As a result, when making a binaural beat, both frequencies have to have a frequency below 1500 Hz, and the difference between them cannot be greater than 40 Hz. Then the effect on the binaural beat depends on its frequency and the corresponding wave. For example, if the binaural beat has the same frequency as a beta wave between 13 and 16 Hz, then this helps with awareness and alertness. If the beat has a frequency between 8 and 12 Hz, like alpha waves, then this helps with relaxation and meditation. If the beat has a frequency between 4 and 7 Hz, like theta waves, then these brain waves are common in the lighter stages of sleep, or the transition from waking to sleeping, and it is binaural beats in this range that are more likely to promote sleep and relaxation, as well as delta waves, a frequency between 0.5 and 4 Hz, signifies a deep sleep. What is entrainment? Interestingly, there is some evidence to suggest that binaural beats can alter our brainwaves because of the process of entrainment. This is where the brain waves align themselves to an outside beat or frequency, because different brain waves are associated with different states of mind. This is why binaural beats are theorized. I just want to emphasize that this is a theory to impact our focus, sleep, and mood. This is why the concept of entrainment has gained popularity in recent years as a possible therapy for anxiety, concentration difficulties, insomnia, amongst others. Personally, I think this is where my personal rule comes in, because in my experience, if something psychological, I say in air quotes, enters the mainstream and lots of lay people are excited about it, then it probably means there is little research support for it. And when it comes to inner entrainment, that seems to be the case. I would rather wait for more research to be done before declaring inner entrainment any more than a theory in relation to binaural beats. Can binaural beats get you high? So, speaking of pop psychology rubbish, within popular culture, There is the idea that digital drugs can use sounds and music to induce a euphoric state similar to the happy states that you get from LSD, cocaine, and ecstasy. As digital drugs use recordings, and these are based on binaural beats. Some people argue that binaural beats can provide a natural sensation of body relaxing whilst the mind expands. Yet honestly, the research into their effectiveness is very limited and very disputed. What are the potential benefits of binaural beats? So, binaural beats are meant to encourage the brain to transition from a more alert, higher frequency state to a slower, more relaxed state, at least according to the theory. There are some small studies that show this to be the case, but other studies have found evidence that the changes in brainwave patterns might trigger hormonal changes. This leads to increases in melatonin and DHEA and decreased cortisol levels. Therefore, people who use binaural beats might report feeling more relaxed, experience increased focus, lower anxiety, and better sleep, and seeing improvements in their moods as well as motivation. When it comes to sleep, this is a very common use of binaural beats, because during sleep, the brain generates different types of brainwaves depending on the stage of sleep and current level of mental arousal. Theta and delta waves are associated with relaxation and deep sleep, so binaural beats can be useful to help you sleep better because they shift the brain towards the theta and delta type brainwaves. Depression is another use of binaural beats. People with depression listen to binaural beats in the alpha, theta, and delta range, then this can provide some relief. The binaural beats might reduce depression in some people, but most people with depression might get better results if they try binaural beats alongside psychological therapy. Then, if the client sees any negative side effects, then it's best to stop immediately and consult a medical doctor or therapist. A final potential of binaural beats is treating anxiety. Several studies have shown that regularly listening to binaural beats in the delta and theta range can be relaxing, and this might help reduce anxiety symptoms. Again, though, research is still limited. Also, some researchers are investigating the use of binaural beats in a hospice setting to see whether they can help people who are dealing with end of life issues. How effective are binaural beats? The issue with research on binaural beats is that they often small preliminary studies with mixed results. Most experts agree that the risk of side effects from binaural beats is low, and many podcasts, apps, and other online services provide free access to binaural beats to boost relaxation or focus. In reality, we just don't know if binaural beats are actually effective because the research is just not good enough at the moment. In my opinion, I would really like the research to improve on binaural beats by the studies becoming larger, more detailed, and the studies move away from being preliminary. I live with someone with ADHD, my partner has ADHD, and even for myself, the ability to improve focus would be amazing at times. So when I was writing this blog post, I was actually listening to a Demon Slayer character theme mashup. So I know that if binaural beats can actually improve lives and help in improve focus, then it would have great clinical implications too, as binaural beats can help people with ADHD whilst they're on the waiting list for an assessment and Ritalin, then it would be brilliant. But the research needs to improve because we simply don't know for sure at the moment. Conclusion. Yesterday, I told my best friend that I was doing a podcast episode And we had a conversation concluding in the statement the results would probably be inconclusive. I smile as I wrote this podcast episode because it's largely true. Because binaural beats might have a lot of great potential, but right now it is just that potential. Until there is more research, more real experiments, and larger studies done on binaural beats, we will never know with empirical certainty and rigour how effective binaural beats actually are in the real world. However, I don't say this to be disheartening or cynical. I actually mention this fact because I really want there to be more research into binaural beats. As an aspiring clinical psychologist, I am always looking and interested in different easy interventions, techniques, or tricks that are evidence based that I could give my future clients or friends. It would be so useful to be able to recommend binaural beats to people with depression, ADHD, or anxiety whilst they're on the waiting list for therapy. It would be invaluable to give them some kind of support in the meantime. Binaural beats could be that small support if only the research was better. Clinical psychology is about improving lives, decreasing psychological distress, and giving clients more adaptive coping mechanisms to deal with stressful life events. The majority of this work we can only ever do in therapy, but any support is better than nothing, and if binaural beats is a recommendation we can give in the future whilst our clients wait for therapy, then it is something we have to research, investigate, and make a final conclusion on. Our client's happiness and ability to function might depend on it. So, here are some questions to get you thinking at the end of this podcast episode. Have you ever used binaural beats and did you find them useful? Would you recommend binaural beats to your friends? Where do you think binaural beats might fit into psychological interventions in the future? So, I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. I know that I did, because, like I mentioned a moment ago, we don't really tend to focus on biological psychology and cognitive psychology too much on the podcast. So, sometimes it's actually always nice just to step away from a clinical psychology once in a while, even though I did give this quite a clinical focus, to be honest, and just see what other areas of psychology are doing. And binaural beats, we've all heard of them. It's very popular in a pop culture, and it's good to see if this is a good thing or bad thing, or if this is just pop psychology being just that. Good old pop psychology that doesn't have a clue what it's doing half the time. Yes, and I know that's probably quite a cynical take, but it's easy to amuse myself. So, if you know anyone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And if you want to learn more, then please check out Biological Psychology, available in all the usual places. And if you want to become a patron of the show and show some monthly support, then now you can at patreon.com/the Psychology World Podcast. Or if you want to give the podcast a bit of like one-time support, then please head on over to buymeacoffee.com/Conor Whiteley. And please let me know your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. I always love to hear from all of you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. So, have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at conwhiteley.net. So have a great day and I'll see you next time.